What's up, guys? Welcome back to the ASAP Automotive channel, and today we're going to be putting a stop to the FireChicken, so stay tuned. Alright, so by putting a stop to, I don't mean the FireChicken's going away. For those of you guys know who watch on the channel, it's my wife's Firehawk that I got it for her last year. What we're doing is we're upgrading the brakes. Much needed upgrade, actually. When I bought this car a little over a year ago, the brakes were pretty much gone then. I'm honestly surprised they're not grinding yet. I have become everything I complain about with the customers of letting them go too far, but hey, at least it's not grinding. Anyways, when I bought this car, I've been sitting for 4 years, so rotors were rusted up, pads were pretty much gone. I'm like, hey, we'll deal with it when we cross that road. So any of you guys watch the channel notice that, remember that we did the brake upgrade on Roxanne, my Corvette, last year. Went to the C606 stuff. Well, I still had my old calipers on there, which happened to be a great upgrade for the F-bodies, the 4th gens. So what we're going to be doing here today is in the rear, we're going to be using, well, the stock size rotors and pads in the rear, but we're going with power stop, of course, and there's E26 pads and all that. And then we're going to be using the calipers off of the Vette. Now, the real big upgrade comes in the front. The front rotors are about, I think, just over or right around an inch bigger diameter than the factory ones on the Firebird. So it's going to give us much more biting area and much more clamping force. Another thing, too, the difference here, as you guys will see later in the video, is the difference in calipers. The Corvette calipers have this extra ribbing on here for more strength. So that adds a lot more clamping force on it, so it's not deflecting when you're binding down, which in turn gives better braking. So, like I said, a much needed upgrade on here. One of the other things now, to make that happen, those don't just bolt right up. Close, but you got to get these brackets. We got them from UMI. Their kit here comes with these nice big heavy duty brackets, and then you got, so that'll bolt up to there and bolt the caliper and all that on there. Then also the last thing you're going to need is brake lines. Now, we got the UMI kit and the brake lines from our friends at the WS6 store. Mike and these guys there are awesome. We've gotten a lot of stuff from them. We've actually got our whole fuel system from those guys. If you're doing this, make sure, and we're going to put the part number down below and stuff so you have it. But if you're getting one of these, kits, we got these from J&M Products, actually through the WS6 store. But you have to be careful and make sure you're getting the right kit for this swap. If you don't, the hoses will be too short and you'll end up with issues with them pulling, and that's a bad day. So now, with that being said, we're going to go ahead and start the teardown process and show you guys how to do some brakes. Alright, so obviously the first thing you want to do is get the car jacked up safely. We've got the disclaimer in there and all that kind of stuff. We've talked about properly jacking the cars up. So what I do on the lift here is to give you guys an idea. I get underneath the perch right here where the lower control arm comes in. There's a part of the subframe there. And then up front, one of the subframe rails you can see up there is typically where I lift these. So obviously it's a lot easier with lift, but this is something that can easily be done in your driveway with a few jack stands. Just make sure you've got it properly and safely lifted and the wheels chalked. So anyways, first thing we got to do is tear things down. I've obviously already got the wheels off of this thing. So we're not reusing the caliper here. We are going to reuse the bracket though, because it's direct bolt, and this one's actually honestly just a bit cleaner than mine off of the Corvette caliper. So what we're going to do is go ahead and take these bolts here so we can lay the caliper out, and then we'll take the caliper mounting bracket bolts back here. There's 2 of them. We'll take both of those loose so we can take it off, and then we'll slide our rotor off. Now, typically, I'm all against just letting a caliper hang, because you'll instantly, you can almost instantly ruin a brake hose. And normally we have the hangers and hang them up out of the way. But in this case, we're not reusing these. We're using those stainless steel braided lines like I showed you earlier. So it's not really a big concern. So anyways, we're going to go ahead and start breaking all these loose so we can get everything tore down, get it cleaned up, and then we can start going back with the new stuff. All right, so on these caliper pins or guide pins here, You got a 15 millimeter bolt back here. What we're going to do is go ahead and take it loose. A lot of times what happens is when you try to take it loose, that bit will spin there. So these are, it's only got 2 sides on it. It's not like a typical hex head, but you find them and a 16 millimeter slides on, so you can go ahead and get those loose. And we'll repeat the same process for the bottom pin as well. If it doesn't, see that lined up there, if you can't get it to line up, don't worry. It'll start to spin when you take it loose and you can get it lined up. Okay, so now we got our caliper off and hanging, and like I said, we're not reusing that hose, so I'm not concerned about it. Typically I wouldn't do that. What we're going to do is the main bracket bolts. Go ahead and get those loose. Okay, now we got our caliper bracket off. Looks just like this. This is his 2 bolts that we took out to get it off. And these are the 2 pins here. So what these look like, oh, it's one of our little guide plates coming off. We're not going to reuse those. There's new ones, those rattle clips or whatever guide clips come with the kit along with these rubber boots. So these are your pins right here. You can see that thing's pretty dry and crusty. And this is where your caliper slides back and forth. That right there is one of the #1 killers of brakes. There's a lot of places don't ever mess with these slides or anything. They get dried up or crudded up, or these boots will fail and allow moisture in there and then rust. What happens is these things will seize. We've actually had to replace these whole brackets and calipers before because people let it get so far, or it got so far and so bad as it seized up, you literally could not get them out. And what will happen is if one of them seized up not moving, the caliper will get all cockeyed either way every time you go to brake. And that's how you get really uneven pad wear, or maybe both of them will seize and either it'll stick in and wear out the inboard pad or stick out and wear the outboard pad. Either way, that's one of the biggest killers. So that's why we charge what we do for doing brakes here, is because we take the extra time to go through, clean and lubricate all these slides to make sure they're functioning properly. As you'll see here in a minute, we're about to take a wire wheel and go ahead and clean this bracket up, and we'll clean out, or put the new rattle clips in and use the silicone paste. One of the next things we're going to do though in the meantime is go ahead and pull our rotor off and get a visual inspection of our parking brake horseshoe in here. Looks like it's got plenty of meat, pretty even on both sides, and it does a pretty good job of engaging whenever I go to pull it, and it holds it on the hill, so we're good. If you had any wear here, it'd be a good time now to go ahead and change these out. You know, it's pretty simple. It's got a few clips, and then there's a little adjuster here at the bottom, and it just springs in and out to adjust and wear. You just want a little bit of drag when you're spinning them. So we're going to go ahead and get that cleaned up, and then go ahead and slide our new rotor on and have it ready and wait. Okay, so in the rear, we're not really gaining any diameter, but it is a much better rotor. It's as you can see, it's cross drilled and slotted to help dissipate the heat, and the gas is built up between the pads and the rotor. That's how you end up with brake fade. You get your brakes good and hot, and it feels like they're just fading or spongy and all that. It's actually a gaseous layer built up between the pad and rotor, causing it to not be able to squeeze down. So it's able to dissipate heat a lot better, and just, you know, all around. These things are tired. I mean, these, I'm pretty sure, are the original rotors, and it's got just over 100K on it. You see how glazed they are, and no heat cracking or anything like that, but a much better rotor. There's a lot of people out there who will talk smack about cross-drilled, you know, oh, they crack, blah, blah. We run the crap out of these power stops all the time, which, speaking of which, power stop, still trying to become a dealer for you guys. I'd love to be, so we can get a better deal and sell more of these things, but this is a real popular pad and rotor setup for us, the Z26 or G23 or whatever, compound material, and their rotors. They're just a great bang for the buck upgrades. You don't have to go crazy with bigger calipers and all that, you know, thousands of dollars. So yeah, power stop, you know, I'm trying to call you guys, so give me a shout. Anyways, they're a great company. They make great stuff. One thing you'll notice too when you get them in is they're labeled rear passenger side. So obviously this is a rear rotor. You can tell because it has the inside, which doubles as actually a drum for that parking brake assembly. but you always want them, you know, it's pretty easy. Even if the sticker's not there, you can tell the it's, you know, the way the cuts are, how it's supposed to go. You obviously don't want it backwards like that, you know, or the other side on there so it's spinning the wrong way. Anyways, we're gonna slide this on, and so to save you some headache of that rotor constantly wanting to flop off and fly around, you can run a lug nut on there. I've actually got longer ARP studs. I did, if you, on a previous video, you guys seen where we put axle shafts in this thing. What I've got is some of these nifty little snap-on tools, little retainers that just pop on. They'll fit multiple stud sizes, and it holds it in place. They're pretty freaking awesome. All right, now that being said, we're gonna go ahead and clean up our caliper bracket, go ahead and get everything lubed up, put our pins in and our little rubber boots, get this ready so we can bolt it on, and then put our pads in. All right, so went in and took a wire wheel and cleaned up our caliper bracket here, got all that. Went in and cleaned in a little bit there in the bore where the pins go. So what we're gonna do is take some of this, what I use is a 3M silicone paste. It's basically like a much better version of the little packet of stuff they'll give you at the parts store. I'm not really a huge fan of that stuff. It doesn't really hold up viscosity under heat, especially under heavy braking like this. So it's about 20 bucks a bottle on Amazon. Typically it's the easiest way to find it. It's well worth it. If you're going to do brakes even a couple of times a year, well worth to have this stuff because it doesn't really ever go bad as long as you keep the lid on. Say part number 08946. So if you ever need that. Anyways, what we're going to do is dab a little bit of this down in here where the clips are going to go in. So the reason for this is brake squeal is nothing more than a high-pitched vibration. This is basically an insulator, especially on more aggressive pad count compounds and track pads and stuff like that. They're much more apt to causing, you know, for squealing and stuff. This stuff helps keep it lubricated too. So if you get brake dust built up in there, it's much less likely to, you know, build up excess and cause it to stick or anything like that. I'm gonna go ahead and slather a little bit down in the bore here. Then your pad kit from Power Stop comes with these cute little rubber boots. See how it's got the lip in there and it's smaller in there. The smaller diameter goes out and it just pops on like so. Make sure it's on evenly all the way around. We're going to do the same to this one here, and that pops on like so. What we're going to do is take our pins. These are the pins that we pulled out over there earlier. They go like this, and that's what allows the caliper to slide back and forth. So now what we're going to do is go ahead and we got these all cleaned up. Go ahead and lubricate those. Just a nice thin layer. You don't have to get crazy. You don't want it to basically hydro lock in there and not be able to go all the way down in the bore. And just slide it in nice and easy. Everything's a little bit better with lube. And we're going to go ahead and wipe our shaft down nice and clean on this one here. You don't want any dirt on your shaft or crud before you stick it in the hole, because that can cause issues, cause it to stick, and all kind of fun stuff. Slide it in. If you're having any issues, just kind of working in and out a little bit, kind of purge some of the air out. And these went in nice and easy. Sometimes if they get to where they kind of want a deadhead, you can just kind of bump it in and out of there, just pull it back and forth a little bit. And sometimes you can get a little pick and pull it aside to let it purge the air out. So now we're going to go ahead and get our new anti-rattle clips that come in the kit as well. So we're not going to reuse the old ones. So those bad boys just fit like that down in there. And they fit nice and flush like that. I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. And you want to kind of push down and make sure it's seated up in there. Now what we're going to do is go back to our lube. A little bit on there so it slides back and forth nice and easy. You don't want to get too crazy with it. You don't want gobs of stuff everywhere. You really want to try to keep the stuff off the rotor itself. That's my beef with the other stuff. It tends to break down and, lack of better terms, liquefies, aka the viscosity breaks down of the material, and it starts to run and get on the rotors and get embedded in the rotor and the pad, and you got a squeaking issue that you will never get rid of until you change the pads and rotors. Anyways, that being said, we're good to go now. We can go ahead and bolt this back up, set our pads in, and then go ahead and mount up our caliper. All right, so now we got our caliper bracket bolted back on. It's just a reverse of taking it off. You got the 2 bolts back there. They're 15 millimeters, just good and tight. I want to say it's around 40-something foot-pounds, but don't quote me. I've been doing this long enough. I just know when they're good and tight. So you've got your pads here. So one thing you want to pay attention to is when you pull your pads off, you want to make sure which was the inboard and outboard. So on this particular application, you notice it's got a taller little tit on the back that stands up. And then it's got the tattletale on there, a little squealer. So once this pad material wears down, that thing starts rubbing against the rotor, and that's the squealing you get. That's your tattletale letting you know, hey, it's time for brakes. What happens, we get a lot of people come in here and they're like, yeah, I was squealing for a little bit and then it went away. I thought everything was fine. And the next thing you know, they're metal to metal, and not only do they need pads and rotors, but they need a caliper and all that because it's destroyed it. So if you ever hear it squealing like that, it's time to bring it in and get them checked out. And we do free brake inspections here. So go ahead and slide that bad boy in there like that. And then this one over here. And now we're ready to go and put our caliper on. Okay, and what you're going to want to do in this application is just like you saw me do here. Brush a little bit of lube on that contact patch there, and on the face of the piston. So basically how a caliper works, this is a single piston. The fronts are dual pistons. As you saw in a previous episode, what I did on the Vet is I went up to from a 2-piston to a 6-piston in the front, single, from a single in the rear up to a 4-piston in the rear. Much better on that car, and this is fortunately a big improvement on that. But basically how a caliper works is you've got where your brake hose comes in here, as you'll see in a minute, where it bolts up to the back. Fluid comes from in here, and that's from up in the master cylinder where it pushes through. The theory is fluid doesn't compress. That's why if you get air in your system, the brakes will get spongy. The fluid comes in here, and this is a cylinder, and this piston fits in there, and it's got seals around it, and it's got the outer dust seal. So whenever you push the brakes, fluid comes in, pushes this piston out, which squeezes down on the pads and the rotor, and that's what makes you stop. And that's part of the whole reason with these is the extra ribbing helps front and rear. It makes these calipers a little bit stronger than the ones that came on the car. Fortunately, these just swap right on, which is awesome. You'll see in a little bit here about the brackets that we were talking about earlier for the front. So now this is all lubed up, we can go ahead and bolt these down to our pins and then work on getting our brake lines on. Okay, so before I put my caliper on, I was going to show you guys, we talked about how the fluid comes in and pushes the piston out, and it squeezes it. One thing you want to do is, so we hadn't taken that bolt off yet, so to show you guys, this is actually the bolt that came off of this caliper. This is what's called the banjo bolt and the banjo fitting. The bolt actually comes through, but it's hollow. The bolt actually has it's hollow through there and has an outlet port right here. One thing you want to do when you pull this off is you want to spray this off with some brake clean. And what I normally do is spray through that side port with the straw on the brake clean and let it shoot out. So that cleans out any crud in there, because you don't want any crud, clogging that up. Because like I was talking earlier, the fluid comes down through this line, comes in through this hole, and then comes through into the caliper, and that's what allows the fluid to flow back and forth. So you want to make sure that's good and clean. Now what you'll see here is these little soft copper washers. So the way those work is, you see how it's ribbed, not for your pleasure, but for your sealing pleasure. And what that does is when you go to tighten this down, you'll notice it's on both sides here. So it doesn't really matter which way, if you put the beveled side or whatever on the copper washer. As you tighten it down, it will squish that copper and form it to seal and seal off, because you get a lot of pressure on the brake system. So that being said, it's a lot easier to go ahead and start this with the caliper off. So we'll go ahead and start that banjo bolt in. So rather than with dealing with those copper washers and dealing with it on the back side, you have the opportunity right now to just go ahead and run it down by hand until it's just snug. So one thing you'll notice here is the upgrade from the old rubber hoses, which are soft and can expand, to these steel braided lines or hoses that don't flex. So what happens in a typical vehicle when you go to press on the brakes, that fluid comes down and builds up, you know, you got a lot of pressure. Well, that rubber hose will give and swell over time, especially over time when it gets soft and wore out. Sometimes we've actually had them come in where they've ruptured the vehicle as it had been towed in because the rubber hose got so rotten it just blew apart. What that is a loss in braking force and braking performance. So being this car is going to see higher and higher speeds and track use and all that. That's why one of the reasons we're upgrading brakes, since it needed brakes anyways. So with these hoses, they don't do that. They don't flex hardly at all or swell up, and so that keeps more of that braking force going straight down to the brakes to where it needs to be. So, and another point here is the reason I left this hanging is you want that system open, and by that I mean the hydraulic side of the brake system open for as little time as possible. The longer it's sitting there open and leaking fluid out, the more fluid that's lost and the more air that can get in. Now granted, in this case, I'm going to be bleeding this out. I'm going to be putting .4 brake fluid in it, a little bit higher boiling point and all that. Not going full all out with the Motul stuff and all that yet. Eventually we might flush it out and go with that. This stuff's kind of hard to get right now, so we've got plenty of .4 here, so we'll go ahead and use that. But anyways, that way, so the point of that is if you get a bunch of air in the system, the more air you get in the system, the more harder of a time you're going to have getting it out and making more of a headache with bleeding. So just go ahead and leave it in until you get everything, and then wait till the last minute to go ahead and pull that hose off so you can put the new one on and you get the minimal amount of air. That being said, okay, so one thing you're going to run into is these calipers are very similar. I mean, obviously I'm using the Corvette one because it matches the red in the front, but you know, pretty much about the same webbing on this one. The front has a lot more webbing for strength, but the key here is you're going to need to reuse, because what I did is I ordered pads and rotors for an F body, you know, or 2002 F body, whatever, so they would fit. You can use the C5 ones. You're going to have a little bit of issues, some stuff with the drum brakes. It's just easier to go ahead and order the F body stuff because there's really no difference other than a little bit of headache with the C5. That being said, you're going to need to reuse this clip because the part you're going to get in with these F body brakes will not work. It's a totally different type of clip. So that being said, it just pops back in here and into place like that, and then what that does is keeps the pads down or pushes against them, keeps it nice and snug. We're going to slide it on like so, put our bolts in and tighten those down, and then we'll work on hooking up our line. Alrighty, so we got our two bolts good and snug down. I think it's like 20-something foot-pounds, 23 foot-pounds on those. And so that's good. Make sure that our boots are back right and everything. Now we're going to do is go ahead and work on our brake hose here, which is a 12 millimeter. And what you're going to want to use here is you're really going to want to get you a set of line wrenches. And what that is, you can see the difference here. This is well, it's actually a snap-on flank drive. Open in and box in wrench, which is far superior than even, I mean, you know, Harbor Freight's Icon stuff is great, but no match for these. Many a times we've saved around the stuff with these wrenches, so you get your money's worth, but you know, a good set of Icons will do the average guy pretty well. Anyways, set of line wrenches. You notice here how they curve back around and they get almost, you know, almost full bite. You still have to slide over that line, obviously, but you're much less likely to round stuff with line wrenches whenever you're dealing with like brake lines and all that, or bleeder screws. Well, bleeder screws you can use it closed in most of the time. Anyways, it's going to save you a lot of headache because once you round one of those, you're really in trouble and you're going to have a hell of a time. So what we're going to do is go ahead and break it loose with this 12 millimeter, and then we'll come back so we're not having to fight so much, and we'll run it, you know, all the way loose with this, and then we'll pop our clip out here. So you'll see there's a little folded over, looks like a little post, you know, clip just folded over, and that's what retains this. So that actually slides down in this slot here. You'll notice this has a couple of flat edges on it, or no, I'm sorry, this one actually has a notch in it, and you'll see here once we get this out, that'll line up in a groove there, and then it goes through, and that clip goes into this recess here that holds it in place. That's how this one's held here. And then once you go ahead and start your line. Now, I will give you a little bit of tidbit here. It'll save you a lot of headache to go ahead and start that nut before you put that clip in. Make life a lot easier. Go ahead and start it, run it down finger tight, then go ahead and line it up in there and put in your clip. Otherwise, with this hard metal line here, you're going to have a hell of a time getting started. One of the last things you want to do is cross thread it, and then you're really in some trouble. So I'm going to get in here and go ahead and get this clip out. I'm not going to lie, they're a bit of an aggravating and pain in the butt. There's different ways. Sometimes you get a flathead screwdriver on either side and walk it up, or tap it out with a hammer. Just whatever works best for you in the application. So. All right, so now we got the old caliper and the hose off and out of the way. We can go ahead and work on hooking this up. And as you'll see, there's a couple of grooves in that bracket, one on the top, one down the bottom. The way this one lays out, it looks like we're going to be dealing with the top one. So a little bit different on the other side. So now what we can do is go ahead and come over here with a 13 and go ahead and snug up our banjo bolt so it's not moving around on us. And you're going to feel it as you're tightening it. You're going to feel those crush washers kind of give in. You don't want to over tighten and breaking it, but just good and snug. You'll know if you didn't get it tight enough if it's leaking whenever you put it back together. Now, one thing you want to make sure here is clean your tip. You don't want any dirty crusties on your tip because that'll end up with a bad day. And it'll grow more crusties and cause issues and leaking issues. What we're going to do is go ahead and stick it in the hole here, and you'll see how that lines up in that groove right there, like so. And we're going to go ahead and work on, and this is where I was talking about, it's much easier to go ahead and start your nut before you put the clip in, because it makes life a lot easier. Because of course it's wanting to be a pain in the you-know-what. Okay, this. All right, and we finally got it started. So I'm gonna go ahead and run it and barely snug it a bit with a regular open end wrench, and then come back and put my clip in and go ahead and tighten it down. That's snug there. All right, so notice here how it's got the little bell bottom, you know, flared out there. What you want is you want that away from the bracket. You want to make sure you see our hose is good and in there. Slide it down so it catches that groove. And then what you'll do is take a little hammer, a little persuader, and so it's nice and flush. What you're gonna do now that it's in there, so that notch is going to keep it from rotating on you and twisting, because that's the last thing you want to do with that metal line. Go ahead and take your line wrench back on and snug her on down. All right. Cool. Now, except for bleeding the brakes out, we're pretty much done here in the back. I've actually already done the other side of the car, and it's the same exact thing. Now, there is another thing we got to do in the back. It's a little bit of a pain, is the center brake hose. So you've got a brake hose out here on each side, but in the center, you've got a hose coming down from the body to the axle, so that allows for flex there. So we've got to change that as well. That's why it's a 5-piece kit instead of just a regular 4-piece. So we'll get back to that in a minute. What we're going to go ahead now is focus on doing the front and go from there. Okay, so now in the front, we're going to be, like I said, going to the bigger rotors, new caliper assembly, and we've also got that adapter bracket that we got to put on here, and I'm about to show you how to do all that. The first thing we got to do is tear this all down. Obviously, I got the wheel off already. What I'm going to go do is just go ahead and take off the whole caliper assembly as one and just let it hang. Like I said, I'm not concerned about the hoses because I'm not reusing them. They're going straight in the trash. So these bracket bolts are 2 18 millimeters. I got a flex head impact on here in my trusty fender gun. So I'm gonna go ahead and bust these loose, go and let this hang, pull our rotor off, and then we'll go from there. All right, so now we got our caliper assembly all off. We got our rotor off. The next thing we're gonna do is we've got an ABS connector back here with 2 tabs on it. You can just reach back and pop those 2 tabs off like that. You want to be gentle because it's old plastic and brittle. You pull these 2 off and that slides off the ABS sensor We're going to lay that out of the way for right now. Now you've got 4 bolts and they're 13mm heads. We're going to go ahead and take these off. Go ahead and knock this loose and pull the hub assembly out for right now. Technically, you know, as corroded as it is, it's probably, you know, it'll stay in there while you do your bracket and swap it over. But I'd like to go ahead and knock it out, go ahead and clean the surfaces in there. And to be honest, I'm going to come back and hopefully upgrade these front wheel bearing assemblies later on. I just couldn't find anything right now. So anyways, we're going to take these 4 bolts out, go ahead and knock this out, clean our surfaces up, and I'll explain to you what we had to do to modify this knuckle to fit that new bracket assembly. Alright, so now we got our wheel hub assembly out. Went in and took the wire brush in and cleaned up everything, cleaned our mating surface here, and cleaned our surface points on the back, because that's where this bracket's going to bolt up. They supply you with longer bolts and washers to go through there to go ahead and tighten that up and bolt everything up. Now the problem is, you see, this thing doesn't want to line up because of this right here, this tab. So the next thing we got to do is, they say in the instructions about using a reciprocating saw or something like that. If you got one with a metal cutting blade, cool. I just like using a Ziz wheel. I can get more control over it. What you're going to do is run you a straight line up here, just run right across and go ahead and cut this tab off, and that way, as you see, I just showed a second ago, it will not line up. The top one's fine. Now, this is if you got an LS car, so a 98 and up. If you've got an LT car like 93 to 97, it talks about in the instructions about having to cut both of these because they are a little bit different. So in this case, this thing's an 02, literally one of the last ones to roll off the line. So I just got to cut the bottom one off. So I'm going to go ahead and Ziz that off, and then we'll go from there. Right, so once you got it cut off, you should end up something like this. I did a little bit of an angle, it kind of the way the blade wanted to go, so I just rode with it. So nice and clean and flush, so that tab's off. It is a point of no return. There's no going back other than getting a new knuckle if you ever want to go back. So that being said, I got our surfaces cleaned up here and here for the hub. You'll notice here it's got a little arrow. It says front on the ABS sensor connector there. So when you put it back in, you want to make sure it's facing that way. So what will happen now is this bracket will get, or this hub assembly will go in like so, and then the bracket goes in on the back side, and then we got our 4 bolts here. And that mounts up all pretty nice and like that. So what it is, the bolts you pulled out for the hub are replaced by these. There comes in the kit. There's a total of 8, 4 for each side. They're grade 10.9 hardware, so they're good and strong. What we're going to do is put a little bit of red Loctite on the threads, and then we'll come through the bracket back here, through the knuckle, and then into the hub. So it's going to get a little bit of Loctite, because you definitely don't want these coming back off. And like I said, you'll just put the washer on there like so, and slide her on through. Got ours pointing the right way. And go ahead and get that one started a good bit with hand tight, that way it's not all flopping around on you. Now, what we'll do is head in. Doing that one, and repeat the process for the other 3 bolts. And snake those in there. Course, this one's going to want to be a little bit of a pain. You might have to go and turn the key so you can turn the wheel and get this lined up, and we can get these in and out, or in. Alright, so now we got our bolts run down just snug. I'm going to go back and these torque to 47 foot-pounds. Alright, so now I got those torqued down. I like to make 2 passes, so I go around 1 pass and then come back around again. Now what we can do is go ahead and plug in our ABS sensor, Normally, a car this old, the wire is going to be pretty well formed in place. It's pretty easy to know how it goes back. But you'll see here, it's got the nice little notch in it right there. So it goes in with that facing outward. So we're going to go ahead and plug that back in. You just want to make sure both tabs click in like they should, and you're good. So now our bracket's on, our hub's bolted back up, our ABS sensor is bolted back up. Next thing we can do is go ahead and put our new rotor on, and then we'll work on putting our brake caliper on. All right, so to give a little bit of perspective, here's the difference between the new front C5 rotor and the old front F-body rotor. Almost about a solid inch difference in bigger in diameter. That's the part of the necessity for having that bracket. So it's going to give us a heck of a lot more bite, more grabbing surface area, and to dissipate heat and all that, and just all around general better braking. Okay, and as you'll see, like I said, it's a great thing about these, are labeled which is which. So front passenger side, we're going to use our little tool on here to go ahead and lock that in place. And now we can go ahead and work on putting our bracket on. So the front, same exact basic principle, except this is a dual piston instead of a single piston caliper. You got your slide pins, and you got your boots, and you got your areas for your little anti-rattle clips. So you're going to lube it in all the same places. Here's the other. Pop those on like so. Spin them around a little bit so they seat right. Remember, you want your smaller part on the outside. That's your sealing surface. Spin it around. All right, so now that we got our caliper bracket all back together and prepped and ready, what we're going to do is go ahead and mount it. You've got new bolts for that. You're not going to reuse the old ones because of the new bracket assembly. These are going to come through the back side. I'm going to put a little bit of red Loctite on here. And once we get this mounted down, or tightened out, we're going to tighten these to 125 foot-pounds. All right, so we got our two caliper bracket bolts torqued down to 125 foot-pounds. Now we can go ahead and put our pads in. You're going to put your one with a tattletale on the inside, on the downward side. So typically I like to slide it into the bottom and then pops into the top, just like so. And just like that. Now we can go ahead and slide our caliper on. Okay, so since the front brakes that we ordered are for a C5 and we're using C5 calipers, the clips that come with them actually work. So what you're going to do now is go ahead and, just like you did the rear calipers, lather you up a little bit of silicone on there, the contact points, and then around the front side of the pistons. Not trying to goop it too much. Now we can go ahead and set it on the car. Okay, so when you're putting your calipers on, like I was talking about earlier, you want to make sure your bleeder's at the top side and your line comes in at the bottom. So we got the right one on here. I'm going to go ahead and slide this bad boy on. Got a little bit of blue Loctite on my bolts. And those will tighten down to 23 foot-pounds. And then we'll go ahead and work on putting our line on. Alright, so just like the back hose, you got another banjo fitting here. We got our bolt all cleaned up, blew through the side port to blow out any crud or anything in there. Swipe the tip off. And just make sure your crush washer's on both sides. And now what we'll do is go ahead, and you're going to want it on these, on either side, you're going to want them facing forward and loop. That way they make a nice straight shot to the bracket. Okay, so now the same basic principle as the back. So we've got a nut on their brake line here. We got the retaining clip and then our hose that comes up. So what we're going to do is go ahead and bust the nut loose, and then we're going to go ahead and work on getting the clip, or go ahead and get that all the way off. And then we're going to work on getting the clip out, so then the line will come out and the caliper will come off. And then we can go ahead and hook up the new line. All right, so now we got the nut loose, the clip out of there just like the back. Now we can go ahead and set that in our pan and let it do its thing. Alright, so now what we're going to do is make sure your tip's good and clean. You don't want any crusties on your tip. And you're going to go ahead and see how there's the flat sides here. That's just going to kind of fall in and line up there. So like I was saying in the back, you're going to want to go ahead and start your nut before you put that clip in and all that. It's going to make life a heck of a lot easier. Now once you get it started, get a few threads in. You're going to put your clip in just like the back one. This side will go up against the bracket and the flared out part will go away from it. Alright, so we got our clip back in and our nut tightened down. I'm going to go ahead and clean that up a little bit. And what we're going to do next is I'm going to go ahead and raise it on up and show you guys how to change out that last center hose in the back to complete the stainless steel brake hose upgrade. Now, you can do this without having to do all this brake upgrade. There is a different kit for just a regular F-body if you're just wanting to get a little bit better performance and go that route. Obviously, I went this route because I've already had the calipers, so it's rather feasible. But anyways, so that's back on. We're going to clean that up. We'll go ahead and show you how to do the rear. Now we've got our fifth and final brake hose to replace, and that is the main one coming to the rear. So you've got one each in the front, and then in the back you've got the two outers that we've seen here previously, and then you've got this fifth one. That what it does is it's one line that comes back, comes down, and then tees off to the two sides. As you can see here, so this is where it comes in, and you got this end here where it bolts down to the tab on the axle housing, and then you got the two lines that come in there. So we got a couple of 12 millimeters here, and then what feels like probably maybe a 13 or 14 up top side, and then we've got another looks like maybe a 13 or 14 there as well. And we'll go ahead and, once again, you got another clip here, so you'll break the line loose, pop the clip out, and then you can go from there. So what we're going to do is go ahead and start at this end and then work our way back. Alright, so I stand corrected. These are actually an 11 millimeter on these two side lines. So I'll just go ahead and break those loose. And makes it a little bit fun getting off with that spring retainer on there. And just break those loose. And then so we'll get those out of there, and then we got a 13 millimeter on top. Go ahead and change out this end. Alright, so you'll notice the bolt that comes out of here. It's a nice little shoulder bolt. So it just threads into the tab there on the differential housing, and that'll go through like this, and that's what holds it down. And then you see your two lines that come in there. So I'm going to make sure you clean your tips. You don't want any dirty tips here. That'll really cause a lot of headache, and nobody likes a dirty tip. So we'll go ahead and start our nut, and then start our other nut. And once we get those nice and finger tight, let's go ahead and bang those on down. And we'll start this one. Key here is you don't want to tighten anything yet. You want to get everything started. So makes life a lot easier for you. Now we're good there. So I can go ahead and tighten that 13 millimeter down now, and tighten my two lines, and we'll come back and work on the other end of it. Okay, so we got our back line, our back end of the line all mounted and everything. Now I've got this nut here loose. I busted it. It's a 14 millimeter, and then we've got another clip here. This one's a little bit thicker. We're going to go and pop that off, pop that line out, and go ahead and hook up the rest of the new line. Okay, so you notice we've got a couple of flat edges here. That's going to line up eventually once we go to put it all the way through. What I'm going to do right now is just go ahead and get it started. So just like the other ones, you always want to try to start your nut first. You got to get your nut before anything else, because otherwise it's dang near impossible to get that nut in there started after you get all that on. Alright, so that pretty much covers all the installation and removal, all that kind of stuff with swapping over. So only thing we really have left is bleeding the brakes. Pretty much you can go around and crack each one open, make sure the reservoir is good and full, and let them gravity bleed first, and then close them off. And then you can have a buddy hop in the car with you, start at your furthest away from your master cylinder, have them pump it up and crack it open. There's some plenty good videos on there. And eventually, I think we've talked about some of the brake bleeding in some of the previous videos. You can use pressure bleeders, all that kind of stuff. We're going to take this opportunity, like I said, to go ahead and run some .4 in it, move up from the .3. It's at a little bit higher boiling point. It'll go perfect for this. So like I said, there are a few different options out there for brake upgrades for these cars. Actually, a handful. The reason I went with these is simply because I already had the calipers. It was perfect. I had all of it left over from Roxanne. You can actually get a full kit like this, C5 brake upgrade kit, and I think even C6 stuff as well, from the WS6 store. Like I said, it's where we got most of our stuff from. Mike and his team are really awesome there, and always setting us up with the right stuff we need. So after that, bleed them out, go ahead and put your wheels on, torque them down, and go have fun and enjoy your brakes. Now with these power stop brakes, you are going to want to, and it's cool because on their box, they actually give you the instructions for seating them in. A couple of 40 to 10 mile an hour stops, and a couple of 35 to 5 mile an hour stops, and then go drive it for about 5 minutes to cool it off. What that's going to do is, there's different names, is seating in the pads or burnishing in the pads. It'll help them seat in with the rotors and keep, squealing issues and stuff at bay. So I hope you guys enjoyed another how-tos with Mike. Don't forget to like and subscribe, show some love to the channel. We're trying to get back in the swing of things here. We've had a ton of growth at the shop and unfortunately been behind on putting content out, but we're working on putting some ideas to get some more content out for you guys as we do some more projects and stuff like that. So remember, until next time, stock is not an option.